This episode of the Party Loaded podcast is proudly sponsored by Audible.com. Check out their awesome catalogue of audiobooks with over 180,000 titles to choose from. And be sure to grab a free audiobook on us and support the show by visiting audibletrial.com/endgame.
Let's party.
Hello, one and all, and welcome to the Party Loaded podcast for Wednesday night. It is the evening of the 26th of September 2018. Record this one for posterity because it is your weekly hit of everything great in the world of video games. I am one of your hosts, Luke Retallick, partying up tonight with a bit of a full crew. We've got, well, close to the full crew. We've got the numbers at least. We've got Jam. Welcome back. How you doing?
Hello.
What's going on?
Recovering from the plague.
Recovering from the
Hooray.
plague. Fighting it every day. Another step.
Every day. 3 weeks.
That's
my
it.
God.
We've got Matt is here. What's going on?
Hey, g'day,
Mr. Matt
g'day.
Diet. We've got Christian Paulson Brown. Hello. Welcome back.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us. And tonight we have a special guest joining us all the way from somewhere in the same city that we're all located in. we have Jess Watson. Hey, Jess. How you doing?
Hello. Not doing too bad.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Welcome. So, not to sort of get too far ahead of ourselves, but Jess, of course, has got quite a long list of stuff to her name when it comes to her gaming pedigree, and we're going to chat a bit about that tonight, particularly in the areas of motion capture and some stuff that you've been doing recently with Matt here. So, working on a little game that we chatted about last week, of which I played. So, we're going to talk about that real soon. So, I'll give you my unfiltered thoughts.
I'm looking forward to hearing that.
Yeah, no, it'll be good. It'll be good. Don't worry. It'll be good. So, yeah, Jess, do you want to sort of give your own introduction? Tell everybody who might not know who the heck you are, who is Jess Watson and what is the abbreviated Jess Watson story?
Well, there are so many of us, but for me specifically, I'm a game designer and I'm based in Perth alongside everyone else here. I've worked across quite a large range of games in different roles. So sometimes I'll be in QA management or level design. Other times I'll be in 3D modeling. In addition to that, I also do motion capture and I work with the local university, Edith Cowan, to do motion capture with their animation students.
Nice. Doesn't sound super boring at all. That sounds really cool. That sounds awesome. Yeah, all right. Okay, well, we're going to get sort of stuck into a in-depth sort of discussion about some of that stuff a little bit later, but we like to kick every episode off with a bit of a chat about what we've been playing lately. So, Jess, you are the guest. I think it's only polite of us to ask you, what have you been playing lately? Anything fun that you'd like to share?
I've finally had some free time recently, so I've just been getting into Breath of the Wild. I haven't finished it yet. I've kind of just meandering through the countryside doing absolutely nothing important. It's been very satisfying.
The best.
Excellent. Yeah, that's primarily what I've been doing. No particular quests or meaningful experiences, just wandering around, causing mischief, that kind of thing.
Does sound
That's
like
the best way to play Breath of the Wild.
Yeah. I must admit, I don't usually sort of do the whole chill out game experience in open world games like that. I'll tend to sort of stick to a quest line and try and pursue something. Breath of the Wild is probably one of the first that I've not done that with, so I can kind of echo your sentiments. That's yeah, absolutely. So, are you a Zelda fan, or is this kind of the first sort of one that you've tackled from the franchise, or what are your thoughts on Zelda in general?
No, I do enjoy Zelda. It's been a while since I've got around to finishing a Zelda game, to be honest. So I've got quite a long backlog where I get about halfway through, forget to play, and then don't remember what's happening anymore. So this one, I'm committed to actually completing some semblance of the content.
Yeah.
But I do play quite a range of games. So anything from shooters to, Zelda, wandering and puzzling good stuff.
Doing that kind of thing, nice. Well, I mean, it is the sort of game that if you feel like you've got the mad skills, you can take a run at the final boss as early as you want. So if you really want to nail that completion. Yeah,
I accidentally walked into like the end boss battle when I was just exploring, trying to steal swords and things. And I was very put out. I'm like, no, I don't want to do this right now. There's so many things to collect. So I just like turned it off. I'm like, no.
So the creeping globules of evil didn't sort of warn you away from the second part of the map?
I was trying to walk around the impending room of death, but I accidentally went in thinking there was treasure, and it did not end well.
Yeah, that's hilarious. Well, I mean, there is treasure. You just,
That alone is so interesting. Just that it's like people can go there so early, whereas like I only ever went to the castle in like the last couple of hours of the game. Just such a different experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Brilliant.
Imagine if like Skyrim let you do that. Like the final boss is just sitting somewhere on the map. You can just run into him by accident.
Oops.
I would like for more games to do that, honestly. Like
Yeah.
that option to really test yourself, I think, is great. I mean, not to mention all of the awesomeness that it's created in the speedrunning community. I mean, God, that's amazing. But no, that's super cool. I kind of want to go back in and play that game with some of the because I haven't touched any of the DLC. I'm real keen to see what some of that looks like. Not that I want a motorcycle or anything. That seems dumb, but who knows? All right. Well, Jam, you've been away for a little bit. I know you were tinkering with Breath of the Wild as well. Is there anything else you've been playing that's worth sort of a call out? What's going on?
Out of new stuff, well, I mentioned last time I was on, I was playing For the King, the roguelike RPG with a couple of friends. So our first playthrough, we're pretty sure we died on the third boss of the final dungeon, which sucked. But we've started a new playthrough, and this time I get to play the minstrel, so I'm very happy. I love being the bard. It's so cute. He does this little trill whenever he pulls off a move. It's really, really quite fun, and it's one that I've stuck with. A lot of other games I enjoy, I end up getting distracted from, but I keep going back to that one. Had some folks over who were free on the long weekend public holiday to run a honey heist that Imogen ran. It's like a one-shot sort of tabletop RPG, which was amazing and lots of fun. But then when we wrapped that up a bit early, we all jumped onto the Switch and tried Overcooked 2, which is a game that we've all loved in its first iteration, and that is just still bonkers fun. I think everyone got a bit tired though when we failed to 3-star one level the third time in a row. And everyone was like, okay, I'm out. I'm going home now. But it's so great. There's new recipes. The level designs are just crazy. And the screaming, it's beautiful.
Now,
everyone yelling at everyone else and then going dead quiet.
I only know two things about Overcooked 2 compared to the first one, and that's that apparently you can throw plates now. Is that a thing?
You can throw raw ingredients, and you have to. Some of the level designs are such that they're not connected. You've got to pass things back and forth.
Oh, geez. Okay.
But once they've been fried or steamed or whatever, you can't do that anymore. So, you really have to sort of keep the other side stocked up before you get distracted doing your own little activities like frying or chopping or I don't know. It's just crazy and adorable. It's so cute. It's
They've got
madness.
Some standards when it comes to sanitation. That's good to hear.
And the other thing I've been playing for the first time since New Year's is Human Fall Flat. That was on sale on Steam over the weekend. It was half price, I think, $7 something. Mm-hmm. And we convinced Ari to pick it up very quickly. He caved super fast. And it was awesome. The three of us ran through, a huge chunk of content quite quickly. It's the little physics-based puzzle platformer, and it's still just so much fun. You've got to manipulate things very craftily to get through the different levels, and it's great. I love it. I still love it. Even though we redid a lot of the same content we did at New Year's, Luke. We got through all of that in about 2 hours, which I think took us 6.
Oh, like
originally.
When you know what you're doing, that does not surprise me at all. Like half of that time was us just figuring it the hell out. Oh, really? Oh.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just a dum-dum.
No, we were just on a roll. It was great. Even like the really intricate stuff, like trying to hook 4 different hooks from a crane onto a shipping container. Ever just so. You got to keep the tension just right. Oh, it was great.
So I had to describe this game to somebody not that long ago, and every now and then when I'm up late gaming and I fall asleep at my desk, which, yes, it happens occasionally, if I've got really, really bad posture, like one of my legs goes numb, and I get up and try and drag myself to bed like with a limp because one of my legs is completely numb, I've described this game as imagine this if it was your whole body.
Yeah.
Essentially.
You just flop around and your 2 arms can grip things, but it's very awkward to do it in a coordinated fashion.
Yeah.
So you're just running into each other, gripping each other's butt, and then trying to throw them off the level. It's great. Such a good co-op game. So
awesome.
yeah, lots of fun, but sadly, a bit sickly and even sickly, so sickly that I couldn't game too much.
Aw.
It's really sad being home and not gaming.
No, that's
worst.
tragic.
Yeah, I don't like it.
All right. Well, let's go Matt next. What's been on your plate this last week?
Well, I finished Destiny 2 Forsaken, and I say finished with finger
Bullshit.
quotes. I love that last boss. That last boss was so out of left field. It was just like this, what the hell? Like, not spoiling anything, but oh man, like I love that boss.
The story with it continues well into the post-game content as well, man. The raid is all about that. So
I once I saw the last boss, I actually had somebody spoil for me how the last boss is connected to the raid and what the raid boss is. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I wasn't that excited about doing the raid before, and now I'm like, I need to do the raid. Like, it sounds really cool. I haven't seen any of the raid stuff, but I know what the raid boss actually is, and that's really exciting. And it makes me kind of wish that they dropped more hints in the actual storyline as to what the raid boss was going to be, and how that final boss of the story kind of tied into it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, it's really cool. But yeah, I also come bearing one of my funny stories that I've told a few times before, because I was playing World of Warcraft today, and
sounds unlike you.
Yep. I was out in Arathi, and I'm playing on this server where I know a couple of my old friends from like 10 years ago when I used to play WoW are also on the server, and I'm playing with my PvP mode on. And I'm out there and I'm doing quest stuff I just basically unlocked the I think it's like a battlefield thing that happens out in Arathi now.
The Warfronts. Yeah.
Warfronts, that's the one, yeah. So I'm out doing Warfront stuff, just, doing the quests in that area because it drops really good gear. And then, I'm out there and there's a couple of other Horde players around me all doing their thing. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, there's a 14-man raid of Alliance that drop on top of me and just completely kick my butt. And I'm like, what just happened? Where did that come from? And then suddenly in my messages, I'm getting these messages from a friend on my Battle.net friends list. That's like, finally, the mighty Diomedes has fallen. The Alliance has struck back. And I'm like, so this guy was actually one of my friends back 10 years ago who played on the Alliance side when my guild was doing its roleplay PvP thing and attacking capital cities and just completely crushing the Alliance's will to live. And so apparently he and his guild were flying around Arathi and they saw my name out there and they were like, we need to go kill this individual person.
Oh,
so apparently
wow.
all the Horde people around me were just collateral damage. They were only there for me.
That's excellent. Oh my God.
But the story gets better because, I get back up and we start chatting about my old guild and everything like that. And I'm talking about, oh yeah, I'm still planning on bringing it back. And he's like, oh, well, I'll totally put my Horde character in it. I'm like, okay, cool, that'd be great. And he's like, I just told one of the other guys over here that you're back. And he wants to put his Horde character in it as well. And suddenly my guild charter is filled with names of Alliance players that just killed me.
Wow.
So, my guild's back now.
So you have a guild full of dirty turncoats is what you're basically saying. Oh my God.
I even actually ended up sitting on this guild's Discord and just shooting the breeze, hanging out with them, having a laugh over the fact that they kicked my butt. It was really good times. I love that kind of having that sort of friendship with Alliance players since I typically play Horde and PvP. So yeah, no, it was a really fun day.
That sounds awesome. Nice.
Got murdered. Was a good day.
yeah, basically.
So Jess, has Matt tried to drag you into the WoW monster at all, or is this a thing that you will not touch with a 10-foot pole?
No, it's the kind of thing ever since the early days of its existence, I was like, that looks amazing. I can never play it. I could always tell it was too dangerous for me. I'm like, or I could not exist ever again and just live in this game. And so I chose not to, unfortunately.
I am the same.
Be difficult to
I
manage.
resisted for many years, but finally succumbed. So yeah, I can relate.
No.
All right. Well, Christian, have you got anything sort of worth telling a tale about, or are we?
Just quickly. So I've been playing Halle Knight last couple of weeks, and I'm finally at the very tippy top of the end of the game. And I did beat the final boss. No spoilers or anything, but I beat the final boss, hit credits, but then I was thinking like, that seemed awfully easy because the game was full of like really challenging bosses, and the final boss went down like a sack of bricks and was super easy. And I just did a quick search, and sure enough, like I'd gotten ending number 1, which is like the bad ending basically, and I'd already sort of fulfilled the requirements to get the like additional endings that have like an alternative boss that you need to fight, or like it kind of changes the final boss. So I've decided to go back in and get like the better ending, but it's a massively like more challenging final boss, so I haven't been able to just go back through and beat it. I've had to start collecting some more items, getting some more charms, and thinking of new strategies to actually approach the final boss again. So I thought I was done with the game, but I've got to put a few more hours in before I can actually overcome that final challenge. But it's really fun.
Was the point of divergence with the different endings sort of near the end, or was it something you did earlier on?
It's literally mid-boss fight. So there's something you can do in the middle of the boss fight that triggers like a different phase. And then, and I just didn't know that I could do it before. Like thinking back, there's actually like a bit of a signal when there's like a visual clue where it's like, if you sort of utilize this item that you've got, then it can do something. But I'd missed it the first time through and just killed the boss too quickly. But yeah, no, it's pretty clever the way they've done it.
That sounds cool. Do you know how many endings there are? Like,
I think there are 3 serious endings and 1 like joke ending.
Right.
But yeah, and yeah, you to get the alternate endings, you do need to like have collected a certain number of charms and gone to a certain area and like done a couple of like sort of Metroidvania style collection things. Which I had happened to have already done, which was handy. So yeah,
nice.
Pretty cool.
Well, speaking of...
I like that sort of mechanic.
I was going to say, speaking of alternate endings, I wanted to sort of pick up on where I left off last week with Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Now, I haven't finished the game yet, but I did want to mention that there was a little story I was reading today that apparently there was actually an alternate ending to the game that someone happened upon because they managed to get there before they patched it out.
I heard about this.
Yeah, it was super bizarre.
That.
Yeah, real strange. So I'm never going to get to see that, and I don't think the person actually captured it on YouTube or anything, which is a little disappointing. But anyway, where I left off last week, Lara and I were not on great terms. She was not being the heroine that I was sort of aspiring to be. Things have picked up quite a bit. I got to say, one thing this game has done quite well is it's actually filled in a lot of her, I guess, mental anguish kind of backstory in terms of what motivates her as a character. There is quite a bit of time dedicated to that and some of the relationships she's had with other characters that have led to that. So that's a big plus, I think. Particularly this offsider, Jonah, who's kind of been a character in the other 2 games but hasn't really had a lot of screen time. He gets a lot more screen time in this one, which is really welcome because I think he's actually quite a cool sort of sidekick character. But it's interesting so far. Like the game mechanics are very much the same as Rise of the Tomb Raider. Like the couple of things they've added, like camouflaging yourself with mud, sort of crafting different outfits to give you different bonuses in game, which includes sort of being stealth to a few different enemies. That stuff's new, but there's not really a whole bunch else. Like it's very much the same game. So if you enjoyed that, then that's a plus, I guess. But the one thing they seem to be doing a lot more of is a lot more of the stuff that they did in Uncharted 4. So, like, I would almost look at this game sort of from a distance and say, have they just finished playing Uncharted 4 and just taken a lot of inspiration from that game? Because there is some stuff that is an almost direct correlation with stuff that happens in Uncharted. Like, it's uncanny. For example, in Uncharted 4, there's a scene where you go back as a young Nathan Drake and basically have to infiltrate a mansion to find like a treasure within. And lo and behold, there's a scene in this game where young Lara Croft has to go back in and infiltrate Croft Manor and find a way to a treasure hidden within. And it feels exactly the same as playing through that mission in Uncharted. So... yeah, it's...
Were they treasures stolen from each other's families? So it's just like one keeps taking it and putting it back and the other keeps taking it and putting it back?
Who knows? That would actually be hilarious, and I would love if they did that. That would be actually, if there was some sort of Easter egg in the game which actually led to like point to a Drake kind of connection, that I would be all about that. That would be sensational.
That'd be really cool.
To an empty treasure chest, like Lara.
Yeah. That'd be awesome. No, I don't think they're quite that meta, unfortunately. But look, I mean, I don't mean to take this away from the game. It's still really, really good. It's improved a lot since my impressions last week. But man, it's very familiar, I guess is kind of what I'm getting at. So that's either a good or a bad thing, depending on where you land on that. But the other game I played this week, I did so deliberately in preparation for tonight, and also because, when your friends make a game, you kind of want to support them and give the thing a whirl. So I went to sleep during the week, and I woke up in a dark room. So, guys, well done. This game is super, super funny. I was laughing out loud playing through the first room. So I should, from the top, I should clarify. So the dark room is in early access at the moment. So that means that the first sort of room, if you like, is kind of what the game consists of at the moment, with subsequent rooms to come, from what I understand. So room 2, I don't know if you guys have sort of set any dates for that yet. But you do kind of... I did make it through the first room, so I got the warning at the end sort of saying, more to come, which is cool. But yeah, like, man, how do I describe this game? So... I think, Matt, you said all the sort of standard lines last week. It's the Dark Souls of walking simulators. What was the other one that's been used a fair bit? The something of the point and click adventure genre. It's like I don't know. I've lost all the stuff already.
There's a whole bunch of them. Like I know one of John's favorites it's the BDSM RPG.
That's the one I was trying to think of. Yeah, that's exactly right. So, like, I tell you one thing that I immediately wanted to do after finishing my playthrough of the content so far is actually watching one of his shows, because I got the feeling that there may be some in-jokes that I wasn't familiar with, like the whole Darren thing. Like, is that a regular thing for him, or is that just for this game? Like,
that's a regular thing. I'm fairly certain. Yes.
Okay. Cool. All right.
It's always Darren. He's always in the dark room.
So the fans always call themselves Darrens.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's got to be some sort of fascinating backstory behind that, which I'd love to hear. But yeah, anyway. So even to the point where, like, you can die in the name select part of this game. Like, you can actually die before the game starts. It's really funny. So, yeah. You basically, you're trying to navigate through I'd call it like a lateral sort of navigation puzzle with a lot of humor sort of built into it, where you've sort of got a fixed number of options every step of the way, and full-on commentary with a sort of animated sort of torso of John in the middle of the screen, him sort of talking you through the various things that are going on at the moment. It's almost like a role-play game in a way, because he's kind of describing what's going on without actually sort of seeing any of it physically. It's very much like a DM kind of describing what's going on in the adventure, which is really cool, because that works quite well for me. And the visceral imagery that he uses is a big selling point of the game, so I enjoy that. Hats off to the motion capture tech, whoever that was. Really good job. Yeah, no, I was really
that
enjoying that part
person.
of it. Yeah, exactly. But and the VO was spot on. Like, I loved it. The tone and inflection during all the humor, really awesome. So I have one question which I want you both to answer me if you can, because I'm very curious. Now, the game comes with Steam achievements, 7, I believe. How many of those in early access are currently accessible? Do you know?
All of them.
All of them. Okay. Well, I need to go back in and play more then, because I've only unlocked 2. So
yeah. All of them are accessible. I know that one of the achievements, there was a live streamer that got the achievement, and it was hilarious. Like, the people in the office were actually really losing it, because the fact that it's if you look at the achievements, you can actually see percentages of how many people have actually achieved them. Mm-hmm. And the achievement on there that has the lowest percentage is the one that this streamer achieved. And you get it in the most mundane way. And it's really funny. It's also key to getting out of the dark room completely safely. So, yeah.
Interesting.
All of them are achievable.
Okay, that's cool. So I was going to give you a little bit of critical feedback, which is actually going to be probably discounted in the majority now that you said that, which is a good thing. So my one bit of feedback, and this is going to be pitched more of a challenge to you, which I get the impression that maybe I've got the wrong impression now, and this may actually exist in the game. So you can fully counter me if you think I'm incorrect. So one of the things that really reminded me it was familiar in this game was like some of the logic that applies when you're playing some of those old LucasArts / Sierra point-and-click adventure games, like your Monkey Island, your Day of the Tentacle, that kind of thing.
King's Quest.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. So, I know that there was some inspiration for that went in there. But one thing that is consistent in my memory of a lot of those games is that there are some real sort of out there solutions to some of the puzzles. And occasionally when they're badly designed, it requires a little bit of what you call moon logic to kind of reach the conclusion. And that's a good or a bad thing depending on whether you value the humor or actually want a chance of solving the puzzles. But the one thing that a lot of those games have in common is that you usually have a set number of items to work with and a set number of things you can interact with. So if you can't get the solution to a puzzle, you can, to a certain or a lesser extent, brute force your way through just by trying every combination to eventually get there. Now, I got the impression that was the case with this game too, where I sort of went through a few of the rooms and just literally tried every option and brute forced my way through a few circumstances. And my one comment was going to be, I would love to see less of that with the next sort of rooms added on, and maybe, put some things in there that actually change the playthrough each time, even if you're choosing the same options, to really mess with your head. But the fact that I've only unlocked 2 out of the 7 achievements now makes me double think that, maybe second guess myself. So I'm interested.
My understanding is that with a lot of the game, there is a logic to it, but it's the darkroom logic. So brute forcing won't always work. You need to kind of understand what it is the Guardian's telling you, or certain situations will always happen in a certain way, and you kind of work backwards from there. So it's not real world logic. It's terrible Guardian evil logic where he really just wants you to die. But there is some clues in the way he talks.
Cool.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, and it's one of those games. We had the episode not that long ago where we were talking about death and it actually having meaning. And yes, this game is all about brute forcing your way through, because you have to. The only way that you're going to learn the Guardian's logic is by trying something and then dying. Right. Because if he doesn't want you to do something, you could do something super mundane. Like, one of the options is stand up and he kills you for it. Like, he makes a joke about how all stand-up comedy is death or something like that, and he kills you, and it's really funny. It's like, well, okay, I won't do that next time.
Yeah,
like the whole way you get through the game is by brute forcing it, absolutely. But one of the things that didn't make it into Room 1 that we do have on the side changes every individual playthrough depending on certain options you choose, and it makes things more difficult.
Oh, awesome. That's exactly what I was hoping you would say. All right.
Yeah. So I don't know if I want to spoil what those things are.
No, don't.
Nah.
Yeah, one of them is currently in the game.
Okay.
But it's basically a death screen because it's that bad.
Okay.
But yeah, so those do exist. They will be going in future rooms. Yeah.
Sensational. All right. Well, my response is I'm going to go back in and play more of this game. You fucks. All right. Good answer. I like it. All right. So yeah, I'm a big fan of what I've seen so far. I'm eagerly anticipating my next dive in and the subsequent rooms. So that's real good. Christian, Jamie, you got to check it out. This thing's cool.
Hells yes.
It's real good. All right. All right. Well, let's pause for a second there and jump into some news.
Now it's time to hear some gaming news. Time for some gaming news.
So there's probably a finite number of things we want to chat about news-wise this week, because there is one big topic that has taken up a lot of the industry's sort of airspace, and we kind of want to hit on it a bit because, the fact that we've got 2 people who actually work in the industry on the show tonight, probably worthwhile to get their thoughts on what's going on. So I kind of want to label this one as just the umbrella title of Telltale Games, What the Fucking Fuck. Basically. So
that's a good title.
Yeah, I think it pretty much encapsulates the epic meltdown that's occurred. So for anyone who hasn't been keeping up, there was a very surprise announcement that came out last week, depending on which time zone you're in, Thursday or Friday, where Telltale Games, makers of such titles as The Wolf Among Us, The Walking Dead, and Game of Thrones sort of adventure
Tales
game.
Tales
from Borderlands. Yep. A whole bunch of these ones.
Minecraft story mode.
Oh yeah, that's probably one that people would recognise. So they basically announced that they're laying off pretty much their entire staff, save 25 people, I think it is, that are just going to sort of keep the the lights running for a little bit longer to tie up some loose ends.
Just to finish off the Minecraft story mode for Netflix.
Yeah, basically, and otherwise they are done. So came out of nowhere, complete shock, surprise, very much a shock for pretty much all the employees that were being laid off as well. Chaos ensued, like a lot of them sort of obviously now out of a job looking for work. The general public just going absolutely crazy, not knowing what was going on. Surprise, shock, especially given the fact that they have just started launching the final season of the Walking Dead game as well. So nobody really, given that they were still releasing current content, could have seen this coming. There's a whole bunch of stuff that went on with it. So Matt and Jess, I'm going to throw to you guys now just to sort of give your initial thoughts, because I think that, working in the industry, when you see such a name like Telltale sort of post something like this, there's got to be some pretty immediate reactions and maybe understanding of what some of the people under that company are going through. So what was your first impressions when you saw that?
Pretty pissed.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the big thing is that all those people were fired. Over 250 people. I think it was like 253 exactly. I can't remember. There was a number that somebody put up on Twitter.
Yeah.
But all those people got fired without severance. So any owed hours or anything like that, they're not getting paid that. They're just out of the company now. Yeah.
Health cover up until the end of the month, I believe, as well. So that's not long. Yeah.
Yeah.
The health cover, to the end of the month, but the pay was cut.
Yeah.
The pay was cut. Yeah. But then they've gone and announced in the last couple of days that they're going to try and finish The Walking Dead, because it sounds like another studio has stepped forward and basically offered to finish it, which is a really, on the one hand, kind of good potentially for fans if this other studio doesn't mess it up. But at the other time, and feel free to bleep me potentially, fuck that studio. Because, your first reaction to this sort of event shouldn't be, oh, well, we have to make sure that those people that paid $20 get their full game. It should be, sympathy for the people that have lost their jobs, because...
In the old union terms, these new studio, they're scabs, basically. That's what people would call them, yeah. Yep,
that's exactly right.
Crossing a picket line, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they've gone and, there's a class action lawsuit now. The game's off the store. I don't think that it's going to get finished. I think that that's going to be it. Like, the episode 2 is going to be the end of it.
They did say that most of the work on 3 and 4, because it's only a 4-episode season, had mostly been done. So, the state that it's in is probably not that far from release, but that's kind of not the point anymore. So
yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, Telltale. There was a big news article written by The Verge a few years back that was talking about a lot of their internal issues. And the reason why Telltale went and released The Walking Dead, and then from there basically stagnated.
Yeah. All
of their games were basically the same thing, except different stories, better stories, funny stories in Tales of Borderlands, which is probably my favorite Telltale game.
Yep, me too.
Yeah, I love that game.
Yep, so much.
Nothing about the delivery of those games really changed. It was still, here's your options, you choose stuff. If you say something, it will pop up with this character will remember that if it's particularly important, right? Like, nothing about that design really changed. And apparently that came back to the management team at Telltale were really unwilling to allow any sort of experimentation. And so because of that, they just basically kept on wheeling out the same game and just living in the shadow of their most successful one,
Some financials actually got released during the week in terms of the success of those titles too. And it seems that according to those sources, the only profitable ones out of all of them were actually Walking Dead Season 1 and the Minecraft Story Mode. Like, all of the others turned a loss. That is shocking. Unbelievable.
Yeah, from what I saw, Walking Dead Season 2 sold just under half as many copies as Season 1, and then the third season sold something in the vicinity of like a 15th of Season 1. So
wow.
Massive drop.
Yeah. And that is also just game development. Like, I could have an entire lengthy conversation about, being realistic about your sales and everything like that. I definitely think there was a degree of them probably getting a little bit overconfident after The Walking Dead Season 1. They've clearly been able to keep the business running, but games is always really difficult. And if a studio like Telltale can't keep making money off of the excellent quality games that they're making, like that's a really bad reflection on the games industry as a whole, as to how sustainable the way we're currently working is, right?
Yeah, completely agree. I enjoyed their games. I did definitely hit a point where I had a big drop in enthusiasm for Telltale's games, but it was never really about the stories, because I enjoyed pretty much all of them with the exception of maybe the Game of Thrones one, which I thought was a bit flat. The rest of them were pretty good. Even the later seasons of The Walking Dead I didn't actually mind. I didn't play 3 though. But the game engine that they were using just became so antiquated and buggy. Like they never had a release that didn't have potentially game-breaking bugs that prevented me from actually playing significant portions of the game without sort of, subsequent patches or just getting lucky. And that, for me, was just the killer. Like, if I couldn't guarantee that I was going to have a smooth play experience for the game, then I wasn't going to continue giving them my money. So, and I think that was a feeling that was definitely not isolated to me. Like, a lot of people lost confidence in the company due to some of those release issues. And, the fact that the sort of genre that they established early on, it was very new at the time, but other companies have kind of come and iterated on it since then, and we've seen some really good examples of building off this style with things like Don't Nod's work in the Life is Strange franchise, and there's probably a couple of other examples too, but Telltale, sort of getting left behind and no longer having the fresh sort of new thing on the block that just doesn't have the same appeal anymore. So yeah, I can completely understand where those sales drops came from. I mean, a bit of stagnation and a bit of lack of confidence in the product. I think, probably those two things combined just kill it. Absolutely.
It's interesting with Life is Strange, because that game's similar to Telltale in so many ways, but with that amazing mechanic of being able to rewind and then like make decisions again. And that just sounds like the kind of small little like design choice which has such a huge impact on your enjoyment. And from what you're saying, Matt, like even something like that, they probably weren't even allowed to do at Telltale.
Yeah,
probably.
Like, from everything that I read, and like if you go and play the original Walking Dead, like you can compare that to say Batman Season 2, which has the new engine. It has a slightly better character animation. It looks better. But it basically plays the same way as The Walking Dead Season 1 did, which, like, how long ago was The Walking Dead Season 1 released, right? You go and compare that to a series like Uncharted, which is probably actually not a fairly bad comparison between Uncharted 1 and Uncharted 3 or 4. They make a lot of changes. They go and experiment with new things. It's not just, Uncharted is one of those series where it's always visually stepping up into ridiculously impressive territory, but they're also experimenting with their mechanics, and like I think it was the most recent Uncharted games that really nailed melee finally. Like they kept on experimenting with how to do melee attacks, and they nailed it. But you compare that sort of thing between Telltale games, and like it's still just a difference in how the choices are impacting on the story, which is fair enough and all, but you need more than that to kind of grow, right? Like, I said it on Twitter, I really do think that they released The Walking Dead Season 1 and then it just lived in their own shadow because they couldn't make anything better than it. So,
Yep.
I also think it's interesting from like an average consumer point of view, what we're talking about with another studio stepping in to finish it, where if you're not knowledgeable about the industry, even like in a cursory manner, that just sounds like really good news. That just sounds like, oh, Telltale couldn't make The Walking Dead, now Telltale can make The Walking Dead. And it's just a strange thing to think about, that people don't have that concept of even the distinction between a studio and a publisher. That's a division that I've spoken to a lot of people, and they just don't even know what those terms even mean.
Yeah. One thing that's been made abundantly clear this week, and I'm going to include some of this in this mix as well to a certain extent, is that there are so many people out there that just don't have a fucking clue how games are made.
Because I said it on Twitter, like if it was announced that there was going to be a brand new Metal Gear Solid but without Hideo Kojima, how would the fan base for Metal Gear Solid respond?
Ropeable. Right? Unless it was a straight remake, I think they would hate the idea.
Well, they had that with that zombie online one.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it was called now.
Metal Gear Survive, and look how that
went.
Survive,
yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
But the thing I think people don't really understand is that Telltale isn't the name and the people running the studio. It's the 250 people that just got fired.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So it's not going to be Telltale finishing the Walking Dead if another studio steps in. It's going to be another studio. It's like, yeah, the story may not change that much, but like it could end up being really good, but that's not really the point. The point is that everything that was Telltale has been kind of stripped away, and now it's going to be some walking zombie, ironically, that will go and actually finish the game. So yeah.
I think a lot of players don't really appreciate the sort of iceberg nature of games and game development, where there's the final product you see and it's like, oh wow, it's so shiny and giant and impressive, but underneath there's so many elements that come together and so many people that add up to making singular components that you don't realize is what the true essence of the game is. So they might not necessarily have the exact word-for-word script that's of what's going to be happening, but there's someone there who knows the reasons behind why a character chooses something or speaks in a particular way, or there's an animator who knows, oh, they smile in this exact little kind of way and a smirk to the left, and all these little tiny bits, and it adds up to one complete character and then a world and then a story. And then you take that away and go, oh, here's a script of what we've got, and it won't be anything the same, and you won't realize until it's too late. You're like, what is this? You're just using the same names. This isn't my game.
Yeah, totally. I think to a certain extent, some of the Rockstar-like personalities that we've got in the games industry these days, and like Kojima's a good example, and Miyamoto on the sort of Nintendo side, and you pull out a few other names. To a certain extent, it's great that we have personalities like that, but it's also a disservice in a way, because sometimes as a result people forget about the other teams behind them. So it's not just one person that goes into making a game, and if they are removed from the equation, then that makes all the difference. It's that entire team of people that work together to make all that stuff happen.
Yeah.
So
and not exclusively, but that tends to be more of a Japanese thing. You find is a lot of sort of Japanese auteurs, whereas it doesn't happen as much with Western devs. You still get people like the
Todd Howard.
Todd Howard comes to mind, that sort of thing, but it's not as common.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, that's a real bad thing this week, and I think that the repercussions of that are going to be felt for a while. I mean, a lot of the talk has once again come around to the whole, unionizing the games industry kind of thing, and whether that's a good or a bad thing. There's, it's a whole separate topic into itself. Working conditions around, studio culture and crunch and all that sort of stuff. We could literally do a whole show on just this. We do not have time tonight.
Several.
Absolutely, yeah.
That sounds exhausting.
Yeah. They're topics that maybe are not the most pleasant to talk about, but sometimes you do need to touch on them. So, Anyway, on to something totally silly. Now, Adrian was a huge fan of this next item tonight, but he's not here, so I'm going to throw to Christian instead, because I think you're pretty much the most up on it. So what
this
the
is
hell?
The explosion of Bowsette onto the internet, which I'm sure everyone has seen. Now, depending on your taste for somewhat occasionally lewd art, your enjoyment may vary, but so this was spawned from the same place that all memes do, which is something completely random that no one could ever predict, and it's the recent direct that showed putting the crown on Peachette and on Toadette?
Toadette, yeah.
And her turning into Peachette, which is like a Princess Peach version of Toadette. And then so there was a comic drawn of somebody putting the crown onto Bowser and turning into like a Peach version of Bowser, which was being dubbed Bowsette. And then there's been just a whole raft of hundreds of different artists drawing not just Bowsette, but a whole cast of characters. Anything in Mario: Bouette, Coupette, Bullet, Billette. There's everything everything under the sun. And it's been, I think, fantastic. I think
it's basically become Nintendo meets hentai. It's been
pretty much.
No, it's just funny.
Oh yeah,
it's not that bad.
Oh, you haven't seen all of the pictures, Jan. Believe me.
Actually, you know what? Probably true.
Yeah. You can enjoy it on different levels. There's plenty of just cute, innocent art, but there is some more deviant stuff out there.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I kind of did go digging. So anyway.
Yeah. Oh my! You know what my issue is though? The naming.
Go on, Jem.
I don't understand.
Yeah.
It's the worst portmanteau. It's not a mix of Toadette and all of these other characters. So why are they ending in "et"?
Because it doesn't sound as it doesn't sound as good if you do it the other way.
I
like
know.
Toad's
But it's annoying.
Toad
I feel like out of this whole saga, the thing that actually infuriates me most is they didn't take the Bowser and Peach to make beach. Like,
That's brilliant.
Maybe because it sounds a little bit too close to bitch. That's probably why they steered clear of it.
That's great. It's perfect.
that is the joke.
Right.
Hilarious.
Honestly, I don't see where the news is because let's be honest, everybody was drawing lewd pictures of Bowser for a long time before he was wearing a pretty princess crown.
But now they can bring it out into the public and it will get acknowledged and celebrated.
Yeah.
Woo!
I just feel like the poor sort of media reps for Nintendo. First, there's the whole Toad saga from the previous weeks, and now there's this, and they're probably just hanging their heads in shame.
Oh, look, honestly, sexualizing Bowser, way, way better than comparing, like, Toad to President and Anatomy Parts. That's, not even on the same level.
Yeah, but none of it you want mainstream. That's just bad press.
That is true.
For the family-friendly company.
But that's our baseline now. Now everything is like, well, at least it's not ...
Yes, that's true.
Oh, hilarious. So that's the thing. I mean, it's maybe the lighthearted touch that we needed in a week filled with the Telltale debacles.
Yes.
Yeah,
Not terrible.
And that's the news.
Oh, no.
And there was another Nintendo-related piece of news this week, which was, did any of the Pokemon Go players among us, did you participate in the Chikorita Community Day and then encounter this strange, weird Pokemon afterwards?
Yeah, it was a bit nuts.
Yeah, so they had like the couple of hours on Saturday, which was like the Chikorita Community Day, and then as soon as it ended, the entire country seemingly was filled with these little metallic blob Pokemon with like a nut for a head, like a metal nut, and no one had ever seen it before. And then like my Discord and Twitter, everything was just full of people being like, what the hell is this? And people were saying, oh, it's a bug, or it's like a unannounced Pokemon that they weren't supposed to release yet. And there was all sorts of theories. Oh, it's something to do with Kecleon or all kind of crazy stuff. And anytime you try and catch it, it would just turn into a Ditto. You couldn't actually catch the little guy. And then just yesterday, they revealed that it's a brand new mythic Pokemon called Meltan. And it's part of a tie-in with the Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee games coming out on Switch soon. And yeah, I thought it was a really fun and clever way to announce a new Pokemon. They'd never really done something like that before. And the gimmick in the end was that there'd been these Dittos that had seen the Pokemon, and as Ditto does, Ditto transformed into what it had looked at, and that's why all the Dittos you were catching were Meltan, because they were all Dittos that had looked at it, but none of them were actually Meltan. No one's actually got it. There was a bit of confusion where one of the statements from Nintendo said something like, look again or look closer at your Dittos, and they may have and people thought that, they might have transformed back into Meltan, but no one actually has it yet. It's going to be something to do with these Switch games coming out. That'll be the way you actually get it, I imagine.
Super cool way they do it. The thing that surprised me, and this is kind of a groundbreaking standard that they've set now, this is the first new Pokemon introduced by a non sort of what we would typically call canon Pokemon game.
Yeah, but not by Game Freak.
So
which I think is cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. I wonder now if the next sort of mainline Pokemon game that we see is actually going to have this incorporated. It would have to, surely, just to keep everything together.
In the announcement for like what was up with this, they showed images of Meltan in Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, which for 90% of that game seems to be a remake of Gen 1 of Red and Blue or Green. So it's interesting that they've got something like this, which is completely out of left field and not related to those original games at all that they're sticking in there. So I wonder what else they can be putting in those games.
Well, technically it'll also have to have like a Pokedex number in the 800s somewhere, which is going to be way further on than the numbers in the game currently. So
yeah. that is strange. Yeah,
It's like we've got the Marvel Cinematic Universe of Pokemon now.
The teaser, the stinger at the end of the Community Day.
It's very much that. Very much
Well,
that.
sort of on the cinematic universe point, but I think I found most interesting about it was they had the trailer where is it Willow, the one from Pokemon Go? Yeah, he has his own Skype conversation with Professor Oak to discuss, and there's the the most handsome professor talking to the box professor as though it's like this usual conversation and then just casually chatting. It's like, oh, the worlds are colliding. I don't know how I feel about this.
Vastly different art styles that they're both in, and it looks very strange.
Yeah.
It is terrifying.
Oh, it's hilarious. All right. Well, it's not long before someone's going to go and take one of those two professors and put the mushroom crown on them, and we've got a whole other problem. So,
Roulette. Okay.
yeah, exactly.
No.
The last thing we just wanted to quickly touch on before we wrap on the news. Tokyo Game Show has just wrapped, I believe, and lots of fun sort of games showing up there. Bit of Devil May Cry stuff coming out of that convention. A few other titles that have been seen ahead of their release. But the one thing that we didn't necessarily expect, but it happened anyway, we got another trailer for Death Stranding. Now this one, I don't know. It's probably equally weirder and not as weird as the previous ones. This one actually probably shows the closest thing that we've seen to what is likely to be a boss encounter, I think. So it turns out that Troy Baker is in fact doing voiceover in the game for a villain character by the look of it. Some sort of weird character that's got a golden mask and apparently has control over whatever this sort of weird spirit death element goo stuff in the game is, and he summons this giant cat-like creature which has tentacles coming out of its face, and yeah, it all looked very cool and scary. And what the fuck is this game? So yeah, I don't know. Did you guys all see the trailer? Is this something that
It's nuts.
Yeah, I saw it. It's crazy.
I saw a little bit. Yep.
I think that we're at the point now where they probably need to stop showing trailers, personally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've been at that point for a while.
That is true. That is true. But I did
What's
like
the
this one.
game?
Like the first trailer was like, okay, that's enough. We'll stop now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I still think it's like Stranger Things, but you're a pizza delivery dude.
I like it. I like it a lot.
Oh no, I don't know. I'm getting the impression that this game may be closer than we think, but I don't know. Maybe not. We'll have to wait and see. Game Awards would be the next logical place for something to turn up, and given that Kojima's pretty chummy with Jeff Keighley, who runs that show, I think that it's entirely likely that we might see some more stuff before the year is out, but we will have to wait and see. So anyway, that is the news for today. Now, we are going to break from our usual cycle and bid farewell to Christian and Jam tonight. Unfortunately, these guys have got some conflicting stuff on and need to farewell a little earlier tonight. But
Gems.
yeah, we'll catch you all
Gems.
again in the very, very near future. So thanks for coming on, guys, and we'll chat to you soon.
Ciao.
No worries. I look forward to listening to the interview.
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah.
absolutely.
I see how it is.
See you guys.
See ya.
Catcha.
All right, so now we, of course, want to move on to the other big reason why we're here chatting to Jess tonight. So Jess, we're gonna dig into your brain and pick it of all things motion capture and all the fun sort of game dev stuff that you've been able to do with that, and particularly with the dark rooms. So, would you like to give us a bit of an intro as to sort of what you actually do, motion capture specific at the moment in terms of your ongoing work? So, what's the deets?
Well, those are good questions. So I guess the starting point being what motion capture is. So the idea is that you're recording generally human motion, what I do, but you're recording the motion in high detail so that it can be used for other purposes, so for games, animation, other such things. I work at the local university, Edith Cowan, in the motion capture studio, and do that for research purposes. I work on a few projects with other researchers, and I also assist in teaching a motion capture related unit to the animation and game students. Other than that, I worked with Matt and the Stir Fire crew on The Dark Room, doing facial motion capture using a separate system to the one I use at the university. So those are the two primary things I've done mocap with recently.
Yeah.
I have multiple questions coming off that alone. So
I think that's good.
yeah, absolutely. So I mean, how did you get into all this stuff? Like, it's not particularly a common skill set amongst game developers, from what I understand,
It's
at least.
not.
So yeah,
Especially not indies.
Very true. Well, originally, before all the sort of games things, I actually worked in the health industry. And it was, I think 4 or so years back, actually probably 5 now, I decided that I would change what I was doing. I wasn't finding something I was particularly interested in the health industry. So I went back to study games and animation. So I did study that at ECU, and while I was still a student, I started volunteering with the motion capture lab that they have there. They needed someone to come in and put on the little suit that they have and dance around like a fool. So that was quite fun, and then I started learning how to use the computers with them there and helping set up and getting things going, and now they can't get rid of me, basically. And while doing that, I also started volunteering in the local games community on the other side of things, and so more involved, getting to know people, and now I've brought those both together and do both game dev and animation in various capacities.
Yeah, and not to sell you short, you obviously sort of on the community stuff you just mentioned, you're one of the organisers of the Perth Games Festival, which we've spoken about on the show a number of times before as well, so...
I was involved in the setup of the Perth Games Festival, and I was involved as the coordinator for 3 years, but I've since stepped back from that to put more time into game development, so I haven't done it this year.
That's fair. All right, cool.
But we were talking about, so the system that you use at ECU is one thing, but the stuff that we used for Stirfire in the darkroom in particular is a totally different piece of software and hardware. Do you want to talk about what the differences is? Like, what do they each do?
Sure. So there's a whole ton of different types of motion capture systems. Both the systems at the university and Stirfire are optical systems, but even then they're different subsets. So at the university studio, we use a Vicon system, which has a whole bunch of infrared cameras around the space. They shine out light into the capture volume, as we call it. And then we have a bunch of little reflective markers that bounce the light right back to the cameras. You might see when people do comedic motion capture kind of takes, they'll wear a little green suit with baubles all over it. It doesn't quite look that terrible. They are slightly more flattering, but only slightly. But very reflective are all the little dots. When you take a photo with flash on, they light up just like a high-vis vest or something like that. So basically, those cameras all work together to figure out, I can see one dot moving, okay, this is all the same dot, therefore the arm must be moving this way and that way. So that's one system. That's called a passive optical system because the markers don't do anything themselves. And then on the darkroom, we were using another optical system, but it was facial capture. So it was basically picking visual points on the human face, so maybe say the corner of the mouth. And as that moves, it follows it through space and goes, oh, okay, I see this little coloured square's moving up to the left. I'll follow it here and then there. And the human operator also goes in to process the data anytime it loses track of where it's looking. But effectively, it's just looking at little dots on the face and trying to figure out how they move and processing the data from there. So very different, but both very convoluted, I suppose.
Yeah. I do see a lot of pictures of particularly people who work in the voice acting industry who do motion capture as well, sort of doing the get-up where they've got a lot of small black dots painted onto their skin on their face. Which, of course, sounds quite a bit different to the suits that you were describing. So, yeah.
Yeah, so even within the face capture space, there's different styles. So sometimes you will require dots. It makes it a lot easier to track the different points on the face. The system we were using was called Faceware, and you can use dots on the face if you want to better follow it, but you can do it without. There are also other systems that I think are being used in the Hollywood kind of space where they put a sort of ink over the person's face that you don't catch on camera but can see with, I think, maybe infrared light. And all the individual tiny creases in the human's face is what the cameras follow and track. So those are a few of the systems face.
So the amount of time that you sort of dedicated to being involved in doing motion capture and sort of working with the tech and that kind of thing, it sounds like it's about sort of 4 or 5 years. Is that about right?
In the motion capture things, probably about 3 years in it.
About 3 years, okay.
Yeah. So every time I use a different piece of technology, kind of learning bits and pieces from scratch and a lot of investigating on the internet yourself and testing things out and seeing what goes terribly wrong.
Yeah.
But yeah, it keeps me out of trouble.
I guess my follow-up question to that, which kind of comes into, particularly given the leaps and bounds that VR has made in, the consumer product sort of space over the last few years, have you seen much of a jump since you've been involved in the technologies and the techniques used for motion capture? Is it an emerging technology where things are being iterated on at a fairly rapid rate, or is it pretty much, the same stuff that you sort of see from the last few years still being used today?
It depends on where you are. So sort of Hollywood movies and big budget games, they're going to be using top of the line tech, adding new features to it constantly, which is very exciting. Lots of good things going on. Whereas sort of if you're in an indie scene or sort of a mid-range studio, it might be more related to one of the inertial suits where you put on the suit and it's got little gyroscopes and magnets and whatnot in it. And those systems tend to be quite similar. They're the ones you'll see popping up on Kickstarter as sort of low-cost mocap. And those spaces aren't changing quite as much. But interestingly, there's sort of a tech that people are playing with all over the place now where basically Apple bought out a face motion capture company and included their content in the iPhone X onwards. So people are sort of hacking the phone or, doing fancy little backwards things to use the facial capture systems that they're just using for emojis and creating entire games with the face capture from their iPhone, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I have seen quite a bit of that recently, actually, with the Apple conference not being that long ago. So, yeah.
And Xbox Connect is another sort of system that people have been manipulating to do sort of their own bits and pieces when it wasn't specifically sort of made for indie development, but it works out.
Yeah. RIP Connect.
It gets used fairly often, especially for like exhibition pieces and that sort of thing. But certainly not for video games anymore. Not the way it used to be.
No, it's funny.
People
It's
are
funny.
stockpiling them for mocap. I'll tell you that.
No, people decided that the inconvenience of having a camera sort of mounted on top of their TV was too much for them. Instead, they want to go out and invest in these multi-$1,000 sets of VR hardware instead. So,
have the inconvenience of being strapped to their computer.
yeah, exactly. It's hilarious. So the different styles of capture, Jess, it's sort of fascinating me as well. I'm curious, given that a lot of the body sort of capture, particularly with articulating sort of arm and leg and torso movements and that kind of thing, to me that sort of strikes as much more of a macro style of motion capture, whereas you've got your micro style of a lot of the sort of individual face sort of movements, and obviously that's a much more acute kind of level. Do you tend to capture both of those at the same time using similar technology, or are they always entirely different processes because of the scale that we're talking about?
It depends. So there are companies that make the big wide scale room content and then also head mounted cameras that you can use. There's smaller groups which sort of have done, again, more backwards compatibility kind of things with the Xbox Connect, so you can do some bits of face content versus body. It can be different tech, it can be the same. It sort of just depends on what level you're looking at, really. There's a lot of stuff out there, though, for different purposes, so there are options.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting things for me, because when you don't know that much about mocap, it can seem all really archaic. But then when you actually see some of it in action and you realize what exactly is going on. So the faceware stuff was basically a head rig with a camera pointed at John Robertson's face, recording his facial motions, and it was the software end that was basically going through and processing all that. That's basically about right. Yep. So how many hours in total do you think you ended up staring at John Robertson's face?
Too many. You could record. Sometimes you'd process something where, you're telling it where it's making mistakes or following the facial expressions a bit better. And sometimes you could luck out and it's like, oh, this 10 seconds took me half an hour. Other times it would be an entire day on 15 seconds of content.
Wow.
And you're just sitting there being like, what does this face even mean? That happened quite regularly. Or people would look over and in horror to see some zoomed in eyeball on my screen, and I just lost all context for what I was doing anymore. So yes, there's a lot of hours in processing.
Wow.
It's fun.
Yeah. That sort of leads me on to the next thing I wanted to ask is how much of that stuff do you tend to be able to fix in post? Is it kind of, is the value of getting it right first time so overwhelmingly huge that you want to avoid all of that post-production kind of animation as much as possible? How does that kind of balance out?
Yeah, saying the whole like, oh, we'll fix it in post is sort of the most painful kind of concept, because there's so many little things that you can fix or prepare for ahead of time with motion capture to make the space more appropriate for recording, or to get the actor into the zone and have a better understanding of what they can and can't record. And doing that can cut content down from something that might take you a week to try and fix versus taking, a couple of minutes. A really good example I have, which relates to sort of body recording, is we did a directing session where there were two actors performing a scene with, in theory, a knife prop where one was threatening the other. Mm-hmm. And they didn't have a knife prop on the day. And I'm like, oh, maybe we should just get something so they can hold it. And they're like, no, we know what we're doing. We're actors. We can figure it out. Unfortunately, every time they put their hand down, they would effectively pass the blade of the knife through their own leg every single time. And they did not realize. And so they're like, oh, it's okay, you can fix it later. And so you have to go through and readjust the arc of the hand and the rotation of the wrist and delete all the keyframes on the bones every single time they swing their arm.
Oh, no.
Whereas you could have just recorded it properly in, say, a minute, and then it's voila, it is done. Well, how beautiful. I wish I'd just done it again. So post is a terrible concept.
Yeah. It's one that applies to podcasts as well, believe me. Maybe not to the same extent, but I get the sentiment, yeah.
Because I know, Jess, we had that experience with the Darkroom as well, where John Robertson says you die a lot, and every single you die take required post, didn't it? Because you spent like a day on each of those. Yeah,
in theory, you can be like, oh, okay, I have a pose of the mouth being opened and the mouth being closed, and so the computer can figure out the bits in between. But the problem is he yells it so quickly that the camera will effectively blur, or he'll shift his head and the camera will move slightly, and so the camera can't physically catch it. So every single frame of movement, you have to make sure it's right and make sure his face isn't floating off into the distance, as it did several times. Or the shadows might go differently because they've moved their head in a particular way. And yes, it can be bad.
So maybe what you didn't pick up at the time is that every time he says "you die," it's not actually an instruction to the player. It's a instruction to you in post.
It felt like it.
Actually, that leads on to a good one around the sort of syncing up with the voice stuff. Like, does for a project like that, do you tend to record voice at the same time as the motion capture? Is that an entirely separate process and done before or after? How does that actually sync up?
Yeah, for our purposes, we recorded them simultaneously because there were quite a few takes where they might be off the cuff, or there would be slight changes, or the particular expressions used really related to exactly what he was saying at that moment. So we actually went to a studio and set up the lighting and the camera and everything so that we could press a button and all the systems would record simultaneously, and then we had an additional GoPro camera we used as a body reference point for any hand animation over the top afterwards. But it's also possible in other situations you might have a completely different voice actor to the person who you get to do the facial animation, and then a completely different person to do the body acting, and then another person to do stunts, and then that all comes together into one character which is a scan of some other human, and then you've got this character made of 6 people. So each to their own.
Holy moly.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's a few moving
Lots
parts.
of processing.
Yeah.
So now that you've got all this knowledge about motion capture, because I know my experience with understanding more about how games are made, I can look at games and I can understand why they might be bad or why they might be flawed in design, right? So now if you go and play like Mass Effect Andromeda before it got patched, can you see what went wrong there, or the method that they were using, and kind of think about how you would do that differently, or like can you identify what they've done wrong?
Probably not a specific method like, oh yes, they haven't done blah, but rather I could probably quite easily say potential avenues where, things go awry. And it's the kind of system where it might go, you might be saving time in one area and then it leads on to another thing and another thing. But I could throw out some ideas of potentially what issues could have been, if you like.
Yeah. What about your own sort of history with various train wrecks? I mean, point to some of those maybe.
My own train wrecks, no, it's all beautiful in the back arena. All
No, what
yelling
you've
is
seen
on point.
from your experience, not that you've created. Jeez.
Everything's beautiful. For some examples would be there's a VR research project that I'm working on at the moment, and we are recording the facial animation directly to the game engine. And what we're finding is that when you're using different face models, it actually will record differently. So you can record on one blank face and literally almost copy and paste that over to other characters as appropriate, rather than having to have the 3D model 100% ready ahead of time. But you might find that just the positioning of the eyebrows or the shape of the lips or the face can really warp what the expression looks like. Or alternatively, if an actor has a different facial structure to another person who's done some acting, they might need to have the movement on the eyebrows amped up, for example. But then you go to an actor with lower eyebrows and suddenly it looks like, their eyebrows are flying off into the distance to escape. So that's one little example, I'd say.
Right, yeah.
So I guess conversely, can you think of any examples of really fantastic motion capture in the games industry that you yourself as a professional would point to as kind of like the gold standard? Is there anything that stands out?
Oof. I'm not sure if there's any particular gold standard. I'm a bit of a nerd, so I watch a lot of mocap videos for funsies. I'm like, ooh, wow, look at that technique. Well, that's an interesting marker layout on the face. There is a game coming out, I believe it's called Baby Royale, and I'm quite intrigued by their process because they're one of the groups that are literally strapping an iPhone X to their head and recording the baby's facial expressions. And I believe it's literally a fighting game with babies.
100 babies drop into a crib, that sort of thing?
Yeah,
That's amazing.
I think the demo he was using, it was like a rock star style baby wearing jeans and with like bling and everything like that. So
Oh,
I
Jesus.
don't know how realistic. But it's really interesting to see people make the most of different types of technology and kind of figure it out from there. So that's one example of some good stuff. But motion capture gets used in so many things nowadays, particularly games, and we just don't realize because we're so used to it. But pretty much any time there's a realistic appearing character, so any games like army characters or sports or cutscenes with multiple people in it, that's definitely motion captured because it's infinitely easier to do that, and we just don't realize.
Yeah. So the motion capture stuff, I guess, unlike maybe some other areas of games development, it's probably a lot more a relationship between this art to the film industry than maybe other areas of the industry. I'm actually curious, in terms of what you're able to do at an indie level and the sort of tech and budget that you've got, what do you think is able to be achieved at sort of the AAA studio level that maybe is a point of difference that's not just like a measure of quality? Like, can you sort of point to anything that's a particular sort of a big sort of sticking point in terms of what they can achieve with a bigger budget and more sort of people involved, or is it actually just a varying shade of grey depending on the sort of the skills and the talent and the budget? What do you think?
Yeah, I'd say for indies it's probably quite difficult to get the appropriate training or knowledge that you need. There's a lot of information about, say, using software that you wouldn't get from trying to figure out on your own. So a lot of proprietary software or business secrets that you can't find out about because it's big name business uses it and whatnot. But there are still a lot of people out there figuring things out and sharing their knowledge. So the information is out there. Yeah, I think knowledge is kind of the main point. Technology is sort of here and there. You can always figure out how to do something with what you've got, and then there's always little forms of bits and pieces you can do. But the cost can still be a bit prohibitive depending on the scale of the concept versus how much money and or time you actually have to figure things out.
Sure.
And probably also accuracy, because I know for the Darkroom that was one of our big things. We wanted accuracy in there to be really, really close to, basically as close to AAA quality as what we could get with the tech that we used. Whereas if you're strapping an iPhone to somebody's face, to record the facial animation that way. You're probably less focused on the quality of the animation, right?
Actually, the quality of that's pretty good, but it's also because the people behind it are very familiar with the technology. So I'd say, if you want high quality AAA sort of realistic face animations and whatnot, but on a indie budget, you can. It's possible, but the amount of time and professional development that has to go into it is phenomenal to be able to even up for the lack of tech, really.
Yeah. So that actually brings a good question up. So do you have to deal with the uncanny valley a lot?
Yeah, definitely. You can. Yeah, there's a thing about motion capture is that we're really good as humans at identifying realistic motion, even if we don't have the vocabulary to be able to describe what the issues are. So if a character isn't quite looking how we expect, or the slightest movements are off, our brains are very quick to go, nope, don't like it, something's wrong, it's bad and terrible. Hence, Mass Effect Andromeda, where the bits weren't actually too bad, but it's just from our expectations, there's sort of a little extra that we don't realize we need to see for it to make sense.
Just instinctually, people don't know exactly how to describe it. You're exactly right. Because when that happened, when that was sort of doing the rounds in the media, I saw so many different takes on what the problems were with that character's animation. And I was just like, you are not all on the same page at all. This is remarkable.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, and it can sometimes you can get away with things like you might have a more cartoony style character or exaggerated features and build on the animation from that, and that can take away from the uncanny valley elements a little bit. But the more realistic the visual appearance, the more likely the motions aren't going to feel right for some reason. And you'll see in sort of Hollywood movies now, when they do motion captures on characters or scan in actors' faces, it goes so far as to recreate the flushing of blood across the character's face to authentically match their emotions and the expressions they're doing, to get another layer of that component that we pick up but don't know it's there. So it's sort of surreal how much detail you have to put in when you really want a human-y type character.
Wow, that's nuts.
Yeah.
Can't even think of how you do that. Would it be some sort of heat mapping or something? That sounds crazy.
Yeah, it's like a simulation-y type thing, and I don't know. It's very complex and exciting, and I don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
just say it's machine learning.
Yeah. another thing to geek out on and do some more research on. That sounds awesome.
Yeah. A particular one is Maleficent with the 3 fairy characters. There's actually a video out there where they show the scanning of the faces and the flushing of the blood and the recreation of lighting settings on the real world actor versus the 3D model in order to try and manipulate their faces to be fairy-like but still feel human-y. So there's a video out there for that.
Yeah. I guess when you're doing a fantasy creature, it's not as much of a drama with the Uncanny Valley stuff because it can give it an otherworldly sort of alien look that maybe you're actually going for. So, yeah.
Well, it can, but, I've seen the trailers coming out for Battle Angel Alita with her enormous eyeballs, and it is horrifying.
Yeah.
But hopefully it all turns out, and I'm just scared and, unnecessarily, but we'll see.
That's a super interesting one. Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, you've already sort of talked a bit about the sort of development process with the darkroom mocap. I'm just curious, was there anything sort of else that came out of that was worth talking about in terms of like having a couple of war stories up your sleeve, maybe? I mean, how many hours in total did you put into the motion capture sort of process versus how much like footage you ended up with in the end? Was it kind of like about a 50-1 sort of ratio? How would you measure that at the moment?
Good grief.
Yeah.
That is a good question. Matt, you might have a better idea of the ratio. I kind of lost all sense of time in the dark room that was my life.
Yeah, no. So the dark room, we had a whole week that was just recording, where we had John Robertson in a studio here in Perth. We had the camera strapped to his face, and basically he was just doing delivery from the start of the week to the end of the week. And that got all 3 rooms of the dark room recorded, basically. And so we have all the data there for that stuff, but the only stuff that's been processed for facial animation thus far has been room 1, which is about 60 minutes worth of facial motion capture that's been animated. But just in terms of the process and how that's come together, like you take that week of recording time, then probably 2 or 3 months, maybe more, of Jess and Jake Broadby, he was our other motion capture person on the team, who were basically going and processing all of the facial animation from John Robertson. And then that would all get spat out. And there'd need to be another step after that where Lisa, our animator at the studio, would actually go through all that stuff, clean it up, and add polish and little things. So, like, we didn't do
a lot of the posing,
Yeah, like, so a lot of the stuff, like hands, like, we had to have a separate camera recording, so if John Robertson was waving his hands around, we wouldn't be motion capturing that. We'd have to actually have our animator put that into the game themselves. So they would go and animate that out with the face doing all its animation and everything like that.
Even the eye movements, like looking left and right, and the tongue movements and the head movement, that was all done by hand by Lisa. You can't animate a tongue with motion capture, unfortunately.
Oh god, that'd be a weird marker.
So she could add to her experienced tongue puppet. Is that what we're saying?
But even stuff like just the body tilting back and forth and moving forward and back and that sort of thing, that's all the animator. Whereas most of the facial animation and expression stuff, that'll be Jake and Jess basically doing that and processing it through. Unless it was a take like the Yadai takes, where basically we did a batch of those and then it was just handed over to Lisa to do her best working with the output that we were given. Because that's so Faceware, the Faceware Tech guys warned us when we first got the hardware and software from them that if we had an actor, that we were going to have problems because most actors aren't super exaggerated in their facial motions, and at how they express themselves. But we're lucky with John Robertson because he's way over the top, and so he exaggerates himself when he's actually sitting there. And that seems to have saved us a lot of work in that respect. So we were able to batch a lot more animations.
I think it added a lot of work in several areas as well. There's sort of a list of expressions that Jake and I have where we actually had names for them, like the banana face and angry lips, where we're like, what is this? The computer does not understand what this expression is because it's not human, so we have to tell it. So there were times when he went beyond human range and we just had to do our best.
That's hilarious.
But yeah, so I would say probably at the end of the day, it was probably 3, maybe 4 months of time for 3 people to animate 60 minutes of facial animation.
Wow.
So basically, you're looking at like a full year for a single person to do 60 minutes of basically what we've currently got of the darkroom. It's a huge amount of work to just do that amount.
In a scenario, if someone was just doing very casual talking as we are back and forth, a more average conversation, that would take a lot less time. But because the whole point of this experience was to really capture John Robertson's expressions and the extremities of him as a character, motion capture was the best option. And even with all his exaggerations, we really wanted to get that come through in the character, not just us making guesstimates of what he might be doing at that time. So it all worked out.
From a player's perspective now, having gone through that as a consumer, I can absolutely lend my voice to that view where, like, if you had been like an animated comic style thing or just like a completely CG done face, it would not have been the same. It would not have been anywhere near as good. So I completely agree. Yeah.
We did actually experiment with other styles.
I was just going to say, interestingly, as one of the people behind the motion capture side of things, I can watch the expressions and be like, that's not accurate enough. Like, he was actually doing this at the time and it doesn't show off. But I know other people who have not been staring at his face for months will look at it and be, I understand the words he's saying even when the audio's not on. So I think that's good.
Springs to mind, you know how like there's that insult, someone's got a face for radio, which is, a way to call them ugly, essentially. Wonder if you could say to someone, you've got a face for mocap, and what you mean is that you're hugely over-exaggerated in everything you do.
But yeah, we did actually experiment with other animation styles before we settled upon mocap. Mocap was one of the ones that we tried out first. So we actually got the Faceware guys to send us stuff so we could experiment with it and start playing around with it. And that was when Jess was brought in fairly early on to have a look at that. But we did also try out some other stuff. Like there was a version of John Robertson that had a mask on, so you couldn't actually see his mouth movements because the rest of the face is fairly easy to animate. And there was also a Muppet version of John Robertson's head because that's even easier to animate.
Muppet.
Have you ever mocapped the Muppet? I'm honestly curious.
I have not, but you can do props in full body motion capture, and they do that a lot with kids' television shows. Actually, particularly in the UK, instead of doing bananas in pajamas style of a person in the suit, they'll have someone in a mocap suit and someone doing a little puppet for the head.
Yeah.
So it can happen, but I haven't done it.
Which actually brings up a question I was going to ask. Like, you can map the human face to basically anything for like animation. So like if I wanted to have a 3D model of a lion's head and then I wanted it to speak like a human, I could do that?
You could. It depends on the quality of the model and really particularly the rigging to be able to translate the movements of a human face into a very unusual character by comparison. I know that for the Lord of the Rings, Benedict Cumberbatch, they recorded him for the purpose of doing the dragon Smorg, but in the end they actually just used it as more of a visual reference rather than using the dots. Because the translation of the open jaw was quite difficult and the movement of the lips on the tip of the face. But yes, technically it is possible, but not necessarily worthwhile.
I think their budget for that film went into other monstrosity areas that were unnecessary. So yeah, whole other thing. Yeah, man, this is absolutely fascinating. I think it all sort of lends itself well to the point that we made earlier this episode when we were talking about the Telltale stuff. It's just like making video games is really hard. It's really hard.
So many layers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Actually, Jess, what is your opinion? So Telltale's animation, do you think that was a facial motion capture or were they using like an automated method? What do you think?
I'm not super familiar with it, actually. I started playing some of the Telltale games and I get very angry about not being able to change my choices. So I'm more of a Life is Strange person, to be honest, because that is peak, my decision-making system of going backwards and changing everything. So don't know. No idea.
What about Life is Strange then? Like, so what do you think its animation method was? Like, was it using facial motion capture or something else?
That is a very good question. Now I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. It is possible they used mocap, but I think it's more likely they did hand animation. Sometimes, depending on the way a character can speak, you can hand animate it quite efficiently. I'm not sure.
Yeah, they've got those exaggerated sort of black line features. My memory is not good enough,
basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I know like there's a whole method of automating based on vowels that people say. And it can figure out like, okay, this would be the shape of the mouth and spit that out. But it doesn't line up very well. And you have to have kind of a cartoony character where you're not too worried about accuracy for that to really work. Yeah,
definitely. So sometimes you'll see a character and it's like, it feels like they're saying things close enough. It might be the vowel system or a lot of hand animation. Motion capture, you're probably more likely to see it when there's a lot of close-up face work and when you're getting noises like oohs and ahs and you can really tell that the face is moving in the right way. But yeah, you can't always go, yeah, that's definitely motion capture unless it looks really bad and you're like, yes, I can tell why.
Ah, cool.
So I guess probably maybe the final question to put a bow on things is if someone actually wanted to get into doing what you're doing, how on earth would they do that? What would the advice that you'd give them be? Yeah.
That's a good question.
How did I start?
Well, right place, right time. You couldn't get me to leave the room, really. Good question. There are quite a few low-cost systems. I would start by kind of watching some videos, seeing what people are doing out there with systems like the Kinect. There's little bits and pieces you can play with, like Face Rig, which I think you can purchase on Steam, and that lets you play around with motion capture through a webcam. So that can be a nice starting point to see how it works. There's even ways where you can literally just video your face with dots on it and put that into, say, Blender and start tracking markers, which I've tried out, and the results aren't great, to be honest. But I only got pretty early on into it. For people who are more keen on doing sort of a full body capture system, getting your hands on one of the Xbox Connects, the older versions obviously, with the Windows cable, that can be a good thing to try out. Or there's some motion capture suits that you can get through Kickstarters, or now you can buy them direct through the websites that can be like maybe $500 or a little bit more, which would be everything you'd need to start working on body capture systems. Yeah, that's what I'd say.
Nice.
Start researching, see what works for you. If you can afford an iPhone X, try that.
Absolutely. And if you go and spend a bunch of money on one of those suits and don't end up doing anything with it, then, there's always winter or, BDSM.
Send it to Jess.
So, anyway, yeah. All right, Jess, you've been absolutely awesome. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your vast amounts of knowledge with us tonight. It's been absolutely awesome chatting to you about this stuff.
Thank you for letting me confuse you with a lot of convoluted information. It was very pleasant.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I'm going to go away, listen to this again and go, oh my God, there's like 6 other questions I should have asked, but that's all right. We know where to find you. All right. Well, we should probably wrap things up because we're running late as usual because there's been so much good stuff to talk about. But guys, thanks for coming on and doing the thing. If people want to find us outside of this episode to give us some feedback to maybe pass along to you, Jess, Matt, where should they go?
Isn't it Ninjeska on Twitter?
Yes.
Yes, so it's at
Yes, it is.
Ninjeska on Twitter.
Absolutely.
Or just look up Jessica Watson on Twitter and you'll probably be one of the first responses, I guess.
I don't know. You're going to get some sailor, let me tell you.
I did the LinkedIn test earlier tonight, and yes, there are a lot of Jess Watsons on LinkedIn, so absolutely.
Yeah, it's nice, actually. It's a little bit of anonymity, but not enough.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But our Jess Watson's number 1.
Yep. Well, aside from that, of course, if we get anything, we will pass it along. So, Party Loaded on Facebook, at Party Loaded Show on Twitter, mail at partyloaded.com, all the usual places you can find us. We'll pass stuff along. But, guys, thanks very much for being a part of this fantastic episode. Thanks to Jam and Christian again. Sorry they couldn't stay for the whole thing. Any big plans this week? Have you still got sort of dev work to do on Darkroom for the next week? Or is that going to be, you've got a little bit of breathing space now? What's going on with that?
I think Matt's still doing things on that. I've got a few research and VR projects that I'm working on, so I should probably do some of that.
Yeah, I'm doing a little bit of Darkroom stuff at the moment. I've actually got a lot of free time right now. The rest of the team is actually trying to figure out new ways that we can go through and get as much of Room 2 and 3 in on Steam as possible, so we can actually start getting people testing that out and trying things and finding bugs for us to start squashing. But yeah, in my free time, I've been tinkering around a little bit with my own stuff and playing WoW and Destiny. They'll probably be, the theme moving forward.
Nice. All right. Well, we do, of course, have another game to get playing in this week because we're going to be chatting about it on next week's Party Game of the Month review episode, where we're going to be taking a look at Burly Men at Sea. So one to look forward to for then. Matt, I haven't spoken to you about this game at all, and I'm not going to because I'm very curious to see what everyone comes fresh with next week because this is a game. super interesting.
I'm pretty sure, given the title, it's going to be what I do in my retirement.
All right. Well, anyway, more of that next week. That's all for tonight. Thank you very much for listening. Thanks again, Jess. Thanks again, Matt. Been great having you both. My name's Luke, and for tonight, we're out. We'll see you next week. Good night.
Goodbye.
Toodles.
The Party Loaded podcast is a Channel Endgame production. For this and more great gaming content, bookmark channelendgame.com.